Tonight, it is all about the law. 13-year-old girl murdered. 2 college students facing charges, and now a social media site that could have facilitated the whole thing in the spotlight. Our panel of attorneys will debate the legal ramifications. Then, the incredible undercover video that shows a bunch of New York attorneys doing some shady things, and how it's exposing a practice that could be all too common. Also, developments in the sexual assault case against Bill Cosby. He was in court today, and now we know whether or not he will stand trial. Welcome to RFL, everybody. I am Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us this Wednesday night. Well, a 60 Minutes report exposing the seamy underside of some big money property transactions by foreigners, and how several New York attorneys aided in moving suspect money around. Now, this raises a whole ton of questions about money laundering. And here now, one of the lawyers caught on hidden camera talking to a guy posing as an African minister.
We'll set up an appropriate entity, call it clientoverseas.com or whatever, right? And then that will send money into the United States.
If that was a banker talking instead of a lawyer, he could be in serious trouble. That's because under U.S. law, bankers are required to report suspicious financial activity to the authorities. Lawyers are under no such legal obligation.
And that from 60 Minutes this past weekend. A scathing report says that a lack of regulations on lawyers makes it easy to do shady things with huge transactions. The report also goes on to say it's extremely easy to set up shell companies to hide money and assets. Bill Simon, a Columbia University law professor and legal ethicist, had this to say about the hidden camera method used by the investigators.
I think it draws attention to the fact that lawyers may be playing an important role in money laundering that requires more scrutiny.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No.
Never?
Never.
What's your overall impression of it?
Any lawyer is going to be uncomfortable about the fact that this was a sting in which somebody lied his way into a lawyer's office and secretly recorded statements a lawyer was thought he was making to a client. That's kind of unprecedented, and it's kind of inconsistent with the bar's norms about confidentiality. So I'm a little uneasy about that.
All right, we're going to bring our panel to weigh in on this, but earlier today, I spoke to an ethicist who participated in the report here. He's also Rutgers Law School professor, John Lubesdorf. He co-authored an opinion calling into question the ethical behavior of the attorneys in that 60 Minutes piece. In terms of from an ethicist, from an attorney standpoint, even with the caveats of, well, we'll have to see how it goes, once you engage in a conversation and start to give advice, even with qualifiers, have you already gone too far?
I think that when you start giving advice, you are basically setting up a kind of limited lawyer-client relationship, and you're not allowed to assist or advise them on how to break the law. That means you have to ask, and when it seems as if it may be a question of violating the law, you have to inquire further before you start handing out the advice.
Then we get to the sticky issue of attorney-client privilege, and leaving aside how this was recorded surreptitiously, nonetheless, should an attorney be able to say behind closed doors with a client basically anything with the assumption here that this is going to be a conversation between two, and that is very different from actions? It's just conversations. When does the line start and stop in terms of acceptability in terms of conversation?
Well, first of all, the attorney-client privilege is a privilege of the client, not the lawyer. The client is always free to disclose whatever he or she wishes of what the lawyer says. There should be freedom to discuss in private. That's why we have the privilege. But that doesn't extend to helping people violate the law. So if the question is, does it violate the law? By all means, let's discuss it. Or is there some way in which we can do this without violating the law? That's fine. But once it looks as if you're in real danger of violating the law, I think you should ask further. These people were speaking about buying houses, about buying private jets, about having a yacht built for several $100 million. This is not the kind of pay that government officials get.
All right, let's bring in our panel right now to get into this. Mayo Bartlett's an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC, also former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Amy Dardashian is an attorney, legal analyst, and Emmy Award-winning journalist in her own right. All right, guys, let's break this into two parts. First, as jaded as we all are, were you guys shocked, Mayo, at the casualness of not one, not two, but with the exception of one guy who clearly said, not my ball of wax, I don't want to get into this mess. Some other had caveats, but a lot of them were just like, let's figure this thing out. Let's see, maybe even put $1 million, see if anybody catches on, then we'll put in the rest. Did it shock you? You say, public may not want to buy this, but a whole lot of folks I know would have done the same thing.
Well, it surprised me that so many of them did. It didn't surprise me that you'd find some people who would engage in it. And
including one guy who's a leader in the ABA.
Absolutely. although in fairness, he ultimately said he couldn't do it, and he also went on to say that if he found that it was criminal, that he'd be bound to report it. So I don't have an issue with sitting down and listening to the person, and then you can get a chance to get all the information and decide if it's something you can ethically engage in, if it's a crime. But once you have an idea that it clearly is a crime, then it's not your role as an attorney to sit down and try to figure out how to best orchestrate further criminal activity and possibly see how you can benefit from that.
And Amy, it sounded like one of those bad things of somebody calling up with this big treasure trove out in Africa, and maybe we can all get rich in a scheme with it. I mean, talk about telegraphing that the thing just looked ridiculous, but yet one after the other. And if folks didn't see it, this past weekend, there was 2 full segments on it. It was cringeworthy, some of the stuff that were coming out of these attorneys' mouths, including one guy talking about, hey, we write the laws. In effect, we write them so that we're protected by it. We as attorneys are, ugh.
Right, and some of them were coming up with really complicated schemes. So even if you don't know the source of this money, they're talking about, oh, send it to Switzerland, and then you're going to invest it back in real estate in New York. I mean, clearly that's washing money. That's what they're describing, and how to do it. First of all, they shouldn't even be giving any advice until they are engaged in some sort of a relationship, and like Mayo said, know the background of the source of the money, do their due diligence.
Then we get into, and I think our guest laid it out, this idea that this attorney-client privilege and it extends equally from both to client and to counsel. That's not the case.
Not at all.
But if you listen to these guys, they clearly gave off the whiff that, hey, as soon as we close the door to my office, all bets are off. Tell me anything, you know, I'll share, and both of us basically have this veil of protection, if you will. That's, again, not what they teach you in first-year law, right?
It's unethical, and basically your client's coming to you seeking legal counsel. You have an obligation to give them the best legal counsel you can, and you can tell them that you're going to, even if you're going to trial, you can tell them, listen, we will do everything we can with you and for you, but we won't allow you to perjure yourself. We won't aid you in furthering a fraud upon the court or upon a jury. So when you look at all of this, what it does is it undermines confidence in the attorneys. Again, this is a small sliver of the lawyers that are out there. These people are dealing in major transactions that are tremendous amounts of money that you're talking about, but it exists everywhere, and it exists outside of the legal profession as well, unfortunately.
And also, when you're talking about undercover investigations, the rules are different. So, for example, an attorney, traditionally the ABA has held for 25 years, they cannot record a conversation with a client without the client's consent. On the reverse side, though, if you're a journalist, New York is considered a one-party consent state. That means as long as one of the parties knows that a recording is going on, it's legit, and the reason for that is to advance the public interest and exactly to get information like this out there.
So did either of you have a problem with the story, how it was done, obviously under surreptitious circumstances, or, hey, you're an attorney and you do the following, it's fair game and it should be out there in the public? Did this do more good or more harm as far as you're concerned with the legal profession?
I would say ultimately it probably does more good, because when you have someone come in, you ought to assume you should be comfortable enough as the attorney telling your client what you would say if you were in the middle of Madison Square Garden. It shouldn't make a bit of difference. Your ethics should be the same. You don't leave that at the door. You don't leave that when you determine that you're not being recorded and all of a sudden you have a different individual there. You should be very comfortable with everything you say being presented to the public. Now, for the client, of course, it's a very different story. As Amy said,
Yep.
look, the confidences are there and you have the attorney-client privilege.
How about you?
Yeah, I think when it comes to these types of recordings, you need it because this furthers journalism, you know, and on the flip side, it's going to erode the trust in the attorneys.
How about punishment for these guys? This was a hypothetical. There was nobody that was harmed in this. There was no money that changed hands here, etc. But nonetheless, we have in clear video how far at least some of these guys were willing to go. Should there be a punishment by the bar to the folks that were profiled in this piece?
I don't know that there should be a punishment, and I think you have to really look at every single thing that was said. Unfortunately, we were given just a snippet of what was said. But if you look at every single thing, and if they are offered to aid and assist and aid and abet in a crime, then absolutely there should be a punishment. If they were inquiring and they kind of, it was a little unseemly, but it didn't cross the bounds of the ethics canons, then no.
Right, no actions were taken, but if you look at this at an even more basic level, every single day, attorneys are setting up LLCs on top of LLCs on top of LLCs. And it's legit, but this is just another way for your average corporation to hide money and get around the tax laws. Sure. So it's happening on a very basic level. You don't have to go as far as money laundering.
It is just amazing to the general population out there that if somebody in the financial industry did something that an attorney would do, it'd be illegal on the part of somebody in the financial sector, while an attorney can legally get away with it. That in and of itself is surprising. I want to get to this next topic and save some time for it. 13-year-old girl is dead. Horrible story. And it's also not just a tragedy, but it's also shining a spotlight on a social media app that could have connected the suspect and the victim. And we'll discuss the legal ramifications for that company, if any, and what we should expect or not in terms of where commerce meets protection. Stay with us.